Greetings, Earthlings, and Tim. You get all squared away here. How you doing, Bubba?
I'm harried.
You're hairy. Oh,
Harried.
I was like, no, you're losing your hair, Bubba.
Yeah.
Um,
Takes one to know one.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast today. We got a lot to cover. Well, I said we got a lot to cover. We got some cool stuff to cover. We might wrap up 1 Corinthians today. Maybe. I don't know. You know us. We're long-winded. But,
I have been accused of that.
yes, you have. And we'll jump in here in a second. Anything going on special you want to chat about?
My son is home on leave.
Yay. How long does he get to stay for?
He stays till the 7th, but he's been in Okinawa for almost a year. I gotta get something here right quick. Sure. Ugh. Sorry, had to dash off the cam.
Stage assistants bringing notes in.
Yeah.
Good to have everybody with us today. Once again, if you're watching out there, comment, share the podcast on your personal page, all your social media outlets, et cetera, et cetera. It really helps us out. Been getting a lot of good feedback on some of our little short videos we've been putting out. It's been pretty cool. Share those, like them, comment. I don't know, tell all your friends, presidents and congressmen, all that stuff. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and 16. It's been an interesting, I was telling Tim the other day as we were studying through this deal. It's really kind of changed the way that I've not only just read this book, but looking at, I've always, one of the first rules of biblical interpretation is what was the author's intent? What's he trying to accomplish to his readers in the moment, not necessarily first to us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's like rule number one of the first rules. And we've really been intentionally backing up and saying, what is Paul trying to say here? And it's been really insightful to me to be able to pick out some of the truths that he's trying to portray. It's just been a really good study. I mean, for me, it's just been really good. And I think this section we're going to talk about today is no different. We're actually going to go back. What verse did you want to go back to in 15?
I want to step back in chapter 15 for a second. And we talked a little bit about this last week. So he spends the first part talking about that it's Christ and him crucified after he's been dealing with all these various arguments and issues that are going on. And then he does that also as a preface for the fact that, evidently there are people talking about, is there resurrection, is there not resurrection?
Right.
Or something in those terms. And so from verse 12 to 55, he is bringing up all kinds of scenarios, and it's kind of forward. And even in one place, he says, if you think that you can be raised from what you are to live in the kingdom, you're a fool. And that's the word that he uses in the King James, and basically a fool
right.
in biblical terms is a God hater. So that's a whole nother discussion. Not telling you that's exactly what he's saying, but he
that's the tone.
It's the tone. Yeah. And so you can read through and most of us would go, well, yeah, there's a resurrection. I believe in that. Do you? Well,
do you believe in a biblical one? That would be maybe a clarification.
I would even say a kingdom one. I don't know that there's much difference between a biblical one and a kingdom one, but I guess I split that because I'm saying, okay, well, the book says this, and the Pharisees were magnificent in knowing where was what and what it said and exactly where it was,
right?
Which is valorous, in my opinion, in a good way. And then the other one is knowing how God looks at it. Well, when you're looking at Peter and how he writes, and all the New Testament writers actually, those guys had I hate to say a higher plane, because to them it was completely normal.
Yeah.
Which is what addresses the tone, I think, in Paul's letter to these people.
Yeah.
He's going, man, y'all are getting all worked up over nothing.
He did have a deeper understanding of the broader sense of things.
Well, and he
In the
evidently felt like they could too.
Right. Oh yeah, I think that's pretty clear.
Well, it's not just Paul. I think you get that in Peter's writings,
Yeah.
James. I mean, James is a upfront, in your face kind of individual.
Yeah.
But when you look at that bigger picture, he's looking at that and he's almost kind of frustrated because he wants you to be able to see that too, that he knows.
Yeah.
So that's a commonality I think I see between all the
Which is
writers.
interesting because that's exactly the way Jesus reacted to them.
Yes.
How you can't watch with me an hour? You know, how long am I going to be with you? You know, kind of a things until you get this stuff. And so we always have this picture of Jesus, you know, walking around, never being frustrated, never being anything.
Yeah, you can't read the Gospels and come away with that.
No, you can't. And I think it's interesting. It's just like when you're kids, you know, when they grow up and have their own kids and they get frustrated with their kids. And
Oh,
they're
yeah.
like, I can't believe, you know, you just kind of sit back and grin because you know they're getting theirs, so to speak. That's the feeling that I get from
And
some
at
of the
that
apostles.
level, you can see through how things actually work.
Yeah, yeah. That's why
Reality.
you don't get wrapped up around it. You can tell them,
Yeah.
hey, it's going to be okay.
That's reality.
Right.
That's a perfect explanation of what I mean by kingdom things. The kingdom sees through all the way to the end on the reality part of it. And Paul evidently believed that these people could too, despite all the issues that were going on.
Right.
And so verses 12 through 55, he's really beating on this resurrection thing because it is a cornerstone of why you believe what you believe and how
Right.
you do it. Anyway, kind of in the middle of that, verses 24 through 28, and this is what we kind of read last time. Let me read that right quick.
What version are you going to read it in? New American?
Let me do it in the New Living Translation
Okay.
because that was what you were looking at. It seemed like it merged a little
Yeah.
better. Verse 24 says, and this is the New Living Translation, after that the end will come, when he will turn the kingdom over to God the Father, Jesus giving the kingdom over, God the Father, having destroyed every ruler and authority and power. Those are all small letters.
Mm-hmm.
For Christ must reign until he humbles all his enemies beneath his feet. And the last enemy to be destroyed will be death. For the scriptures say, this is in Psalms, for the scriptures say, God has put all things under his authority, Christ's authority. Of course, when it says all things are under his authority, that does not include God himself, who gave Christ his authority.
Right.
When all things are under Christ's authority, the Son will put himself under God's authority so that God, who gave his Son authority over all things, will be put utterly supreme over everywhere. So that's sounds like gobbledygook, but what that means is God came down here in the function of Christ and him crucified, to put the creation as we know it right now back in a condition like it was before the fall.
Right.
Because before the fall, Adam and Eve were dealing with God face to face,
Right.
so to speak, right?
Well, not even so to speak. I mean, they really
No,
were
they
walking in
were.
the cool of the day. I mean,
Whether he was sitting on a rock and talking to him face to face, or whether it was spirit, it doesn't matter what all that was. You can get as ethereal or concrete as you want. The point is they dealt with God like they lived in the same house all the time.
yeah.
And so that's how we were created. That's how things are supposed to be, if you want to use that term.
Right.
So the fall comes. Well, that just wiped out every capacity, because when God makes something, that's how it works. If it gets lopsided, he's out of it, so to speak. Okay?
Meaning what?
Well, meaning that
Clarify that.
you're not living in face to face with him anymore.
Right.
Now we're talking about a big picture here, right? So he comes down here, Jesus comes. So let's separate those two. Let's say that Jesus is his own entity. It almost sounds blasphemous to say that, but I'm
Yeah.
just talking about to be able to associate
For
here.
educational purposes only.
Thank you. That's a good Marine Corps term right there.
Yeah.
So Jesus, who is created, God says, let's talk about like they're in heaven talking about this. This is subjective. It's not in the scripture. I'm talking about the culmination of everything happened. And he says, look, I'm going to make this right, and this is how I'm going to do it. I need you to accept that authority to go down and do that. Will you do it? Now, I say that because it's the same thing when he comes to us and talks to us and deals with things. We get to look at him and go, man, it'd be kind of tough. I don't know if I really want to do that or not, right? Because Jesus said, or other people have said, he could have called down a legion of 10,000 angels and took us all out,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
He had an option.
Well, and you see him in the garden asking, is there,
Yeah.
are you sure? Is there something else we can do here? I mean, and that's, yes, it's in his humanity, and yes, his humanity and his divinity are separate, but they're so one.
Well, that's the overriding thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he really sat down, if he would have sat, if they were two separate entities, and he would have been, well, I need to think about that for a second. Even Adam before the fall would have been like, oh no, God said this. Does that make sense? Even if there's something inside of you that maybe wants to do your own thing, right? And so they just did it. Had to have. I mean, I guarantee you there was all kinds of other things that came up that they could have done not God. Anyway, so Jesus comes down here because that's the will of the Father. And his motion in life is to glorify the Father.
Yeah.
It says that all over John, so many places that comes up.
Yep.
I tell you what the Father tells me. I show you what the Father shows me. His entire life was like, okay, God's going to do this. This is how he wants it. This is what I do here.
Yeah.
So he's able to sit down with people that are what we would think anti-Christian, anti-whatever. And the reason is because they don't know. That doesn't offend him.
Yeah.
He sits down with the Pharisees and they start talking word, and he probably in the beginning doesn't really have anything on him, but then he's going, you guys know this.
Yeah.
And not only that, you obviously want to do it on your own because you're leading everybody else what the Father's not doing.
Right. Right.
Which caused issues, right? You want to know what it's like to walk like a Christian? Watch how Jesus walked and did and walked. Oh no, that was Jesus. Now you're looking at it all wrong.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, when I think what Tim's meaning by that is, if you think you can't walk the Christian life the way Jesus did, that's you're wrong. He came to do it to give us an example of what to do.
And you can't do it on your own unless you've been reborn.
Right.
That's
You
another
need the power-
discussion.
you
But
need
the
the
point
power of
is,
the Spirit to
now
do
you
it.
got the Spirit of the power,
Right.
or the power of the Spirit in you, which communes with the Father on the level what it was like before the fall.
Yeah. Right.
So with all that said, it's important that you grasp a hold of that, because Jesus is going to put everything in subjection the way God would do it
yeah.
outside of the fall.
Including himself in that role while
And once
he's
he
here.
gets it in subjection, he's going to turn around and he's going to say,
here.
here it is. I did it the way you wanted it done in every respect, and I overcame myself to make sure that I did it that way. That's in a good way. That's what I mean.
Well, and that word subjection, it is such a negative connotation to it. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like, I think of it like when I was a kid and building Lego houses, and I have two older brothers, and I'd be playing my Legos. They come through and kick it over. I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Well, then I had to put it back the way it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Or maybe a better example would be a Lego kit that comes with instructions, how to make it look like an F-16, but I made it into a Jeep.
Yeah.
To bring it under subjection is to bring it back to the plan.
Yeah.
To take those pieces apart and
Yes.
put them back together in their originally intended path. And that's what Jesus does when he's saying you're going to bring everything into subjection. He means I'm going to take all this broken crap and put it back together the way the Father wanted it done.
So in John chapter 12, to amplify that point from a scriptural point of view, he says that if I be lifted up, God, I can't remember the verse now. But if he be lifted up, the point is to glorify the Father. So the way God's looking at that on Jesus is, because when you look up that Greek term glorified, it's doxodos or something like that. But what it means to be glorified is the statement, and it's that one word, right?
Right.
It means to be rendered. I don't know if you've ever been to a rendering plan or not,
Yeah.
but it stinks.
And it's not rendering in like I rendered a video. It's rendered as in slaughtering cattle.
Well, use the term to slaughter cattle, but rendering means everything that's pulled out, everything is pulled out and used for something.
Yes.
And so when he says, I glorify the Father, everything he is as a human on this earth and the way he did it and all that kind of stuff, it glorifies the Father, and from his toenails to his hair to his mentality, all of it.
Yeah.
That's the way Adam and Eve were before the fall, right? So that's a powerful set of verses in there. And it's important to see that because he's talking about rising from the dead. Well, that's how he defeated death.
Which was the last thing.
That was the last thing.
Yeah.
Through what he did, death was overcome. So he was rendered out and death was overcome, which is why God, not Jesus, didn't raise himself. God raised him.
Yeah.
Because he had done it perfect. He lived like he was in before the fall. That's the incredible thing that's hard to grab a hold of.
And only he could do it because he's the only one that's not sinful.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why the perfect spotless lamb had to happen that way, because he was literally the only one who could put everything under subjection, who could render everything to glorify
willingly did it.
Yeah.
You can't take that part out. I don't, that's a hard thing for me to go back and forth on, but that's the way it reads.
Yeah.
And the fact is, all that was done just because Adam and Eve sinned. But before all that happened, they were having the same conversation. They could look at God and go, good or not good?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yeah.
Anyway, Jesus spent a lot of time with the Father, finding out what he wanted, and then made it in light to everybody else around him. Take advantage of the fact when the light's around, because it ain't gonna be here forever.
Right.
Anyway, so that's a big deal on the death thing, and that's why he brings that up. It's a kingdom issue, and which is why I think Paul got so worked up about describing it in so many different layers. And
well, and when he talks about, I forget where it was, that in this particular thing, that if he hasn't been raised, then everything's useless, everything's pointless.
So read 34, verse 34.
Come to your senses and stop sinning, for some people are ignorant about God. I say this to your shame.
So that's kind of at the end of the dissertation.
Yeah.
And he says, so I want to put something in that. If somebody calls himself an atheist, the true meaning of that is that they know God is there and they know God wants to do everything, and they go, heck with you.
Yeah.
Not going to do it that way. That's an atheist. An agnostic, a real agnostic, is somebody who just
Not sure.
They may even believe there's a higher power of some kind or another, but they're not willing to go headlong into it. And you could say, well, they're just, being stubborn. Not a real one. They're really looking. They don't know. They'll listen. And so that would be the difference between Jesus talking to a Pharisee and talking to somebody else, if that makes sense. What? The Pharisees weren't atheists. When you get to a place where you're rejecting what God's doing and you know that, you're an atheist.
Which is why when they were brought before the council that time, you see Gamaliel, who trained Paul, who was this fancy, high-renowned rabbi. He's like, hang on a minute, guys. There's something different about these fellas. And if you're opposing them, we just may find ourselves opposing the Father. And we don't want to do that.
And I would transcribe what he said and say, what they're saying is not outside the lines of what I read in the scripture.
Exactly. They didn't like it, but he knew enough about the Word and the Father to recognize eternity when he saw it.
Well, but he sided with those other guys. Don't get in that conversation necessarily, but
Yeah, because we really don't even know. They don't tell us the outcome of
yeah.
Gamaliel and how he ended up.
But if nothing else, his intellect and his reasoning, his own reasoning, was able to look at that and go, you can't come to the end you guys are trying to go to based off of what they're saying.
Right.
And so that's, to me, you don't have to have a powerful intellect or all that kind of stuff, but God built you to reason,
Right.
and with at least at minimum with what you know. And so that's somebody who really believes, if you had that kind of mindset and you look at the resurrection and all the things that are showing what that was, man, you could stand on that and go, no, Christ died for me and rose again. If you're sheepishly going, no, I don't know that I could talk about that, you're hoping God's going to do all the work and give you the answer on those things, and you really don't believe it. I don't mean like in a bad way, probably more of an unhealthy way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It was funny.
My point is, you need to work more on it if that's what you're looking at.
Well, and we used to call it easy believism, you know, I just said my prayer and I do whatever. But the scriptures are really replete with examples. I mean, First Peter, you know, talks about adding to your faith knowledge, and James would talk about faith without works being dead. That it's not about working for your salvation. It's about bringing your entire life and your entire existence under subjection to glorify the Father, because you've got, and I've got, and you've got, and everybody has within their authority everything that is them. Like, he leaves us with the power of, could I use the term self-governing? There's probably a better theological term.
Well, no, you could self-govern. I think the kingdom demands that you self-govern.
Well, I'm talking about as an individual. I mean, like, I can choose him. I can choose not to. I can choose rebellion. I can choose temptation, you know, and he lets us do that, but then commands us not to do that. He commands us to bring our whole existence under subjection, to bring it back to the plan, as it were, to glorify Christ and the Father subsequently. And what?
Be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Romans 12.
12 what?
1.
Is it 12:1?
Yep. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God,
to present your body as a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service.
That's that one.
Okay, verse 2.
Yeah.
And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. This is a part where you're working with the Spirit inside and you're subjecting all of you
Right.
to the will of God. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is. I don't know what the will of God is. Well, you need to start working on subjecting who you are.
Right.
And if you're saved, you have that capacity. And it doesn't come easy. The flesh doesn't want to go out without a fight. And it may be subtle, it may be all these things. But big point. I mean, I'm trying not to get in the weeds, but the end point, I think that Paul is talking about in chapter 15 through the whole scenario of 12 through 55, and somewhat everything he'd been talking about before on that, I think a lot of them were arguing the point because of all the things that they were arguing on. Well, no, I'm this. That proves I'm that. Look, I do this really well. So, you know, me.
I follow Apollos, and he's the guy. Whatever
and all
it
of
is.
us look at that and we all go, you're just selfish. But a lot of us are selfish and we don't see that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what he's digging at in here. And so I think there were people that were probably going, well, the resurrection can't be, because I go through all this to make me the better me that I am. That's what I'm going to be in heaven. And so he has all these conversations about, no. Even a seed has to die before it turns into something. That's a natural function, which means that if we die. If you die to yourself and you accept Christ as Lord and believe that God raised him from the dead, you're saved. So even if the end of the time show up, your old body is going to be turned into something heavenly.
Well,
What here is not going to be in heaven.
It's like when Paul says, "My righteousness is as filthy rags."
Yes.
It's not that your worst day as a believer condemns you. Your best day condemns you as well.
Yeah.
And he's driving home the point here that it's like, no, if you were doing everything, if you were the best that you could humanly possibly be, even religiously and in the eyes of the Lord, you still can't survive in the kingdom when the kingdom comes and it's under subjection and it's being given back to the Father, because it's appointed unto you once to die. And this that we're in has to die. There's that physical side of it, but he's saying you were already dead. I know these flies are killing me. He's like, you're already dead in your trespasses and sins and all of that. And he says, we're here to make you a new creation, as he says in 2 Corinthians 5:17. He says, I'm bringing you back to life. And he's like, you're focused on all of this stuff.
Yes.
That doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's all going to pass away. And we've been spending all this time talking about tongues and gifts and healings and all this stuff that they were freaking out about. What are we doing? And people now freak out about it.
Well, and I'm going to change your term to freak out. It is freaking out, but we see it as normal. I have to be able to be spiritually fit. And the way I do that is I know that I have these gifts, and you're looking at it wrong. You're not looking in the face of God. And remember, these things were tools and they're all going to go away, except for love, hope, and faith.
Yeah, because and there's some practical parts of this, and my brain's just been on this, so I'll bring it up. The whole topic about whether or not, and everybody goes to 1 Corinthians, the gifts are still around or blah blah blah. It's called a red herring.
Yeah, it's not even the right argument.
What a red herring is something that it gets you on a path, and it's not even what's going on. That's not even what the topics of they were subtopics, but that's not the intent of the author. He's like reluctantly even giving those instructions. And some of the times going, this is not even God's instruction, it's mine. And so he wasn't writing a church manual per se. Are there things you can glean from it? Certainly. But we get down to the end of it and he was like, guys, this is about Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yeah.
Crucifixion, death, and resurrection. All of that stuff. Okay, whether you speak in tongues or not. The point of that is to point people to the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus for the glory of the Father. So you have a gift of prophecy. Well, the point of that is to point people to the life, death, and burial and resurrection of Jesus and ascension of Jesus. I don't want to forget that. And so everything, fill in the blank, whatever it may be, healings, gifts, miracles, whatever, Apollos, Paul, none of that matters. All of that exists to point people to the life, the death, the burial, resurrection, ascension, and glorification of the Father. And he's like, if you forget that, none of this stuff even matters. None of it.
And he's going almost out of his way not to make a creed. Now, there's a lot of good creeds. They have them in the military. There's religious creeds. This is what we believe. They try to get it down to the bare minimum so that you don't get lost in the weeds.
Right.
Nothing wrong with the creeds. However, if you keep having to go back to the creed to keep you walking right, you're trying to build you. And like anything else, you can lose if the first thing you say, well, I used to know all the names of the various creeds, and I've forgotten all of them now.
I'm with the Westminster Confession, or the new one, or the Nicene Creed.
And when you read those, man, they're good stuff. But if you find yourself holding up, I got to have the creed. What Paul did in this last chapter right here is blow all of that stuff out the window, and he said it's Christ crucified and him raised. Well, and that's the creed.
Well, and your thing may not be a creed. It may be, I've got to have this denomination, or this Bible translation, or this particular view, or that particular view, and I've got to make, or maybe you're in the position like, I've got to make sure I get everything right. Well, you're a Pharisee then, if that's who you are. And
You're
he's like,
scared.
you're scared to death because if I screw up on this
I
one
get
jot or
that.
tittle, everything's going to go on. And that's what he's doing here. He's going, it's Jesus Christ and him crucified, resurrected at the right hand. He said, that's, if you can't get that, none of the rest of it matters.
And on the big picture, every reason I even got into this conversation is that's what he's trying to do. He said that Christ came, did those things, and he's going to subject himself, hand it back to the Father, so that now we're like we were before the fall
Right.
with God. You have to be like that if you're going to be in the presence of God. And God did all of the work to make it so that we can be back in the presence. You mean later on? No, I'm talking about right now.
When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, the theological term is the already not yet. And we've got this idea that we're just kind of hanging on to the cliff, watching Israel, watching Hamas, watching Russia, watching China, and just praying that God's going to evacuate us, like this great vacuum cleaner. And I'm not even going to get into pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. That's not what I'm talking about. But we've got this idea that we can't really have oneness with God until later.
Well, yeah, and so that's a split theology too. There's some people that are saying, "Oh, the kingdom's here now. All that's just whatever you call it, hyperbole or something like that."
Metaphor.
That's not true either. There is going to be a second physical kingdom.
right.
Everything you read like that, that is gonna happen. So I'm not saying that, it's all here now. You don't need to worry about that. That's not what I
and
mean
even
at all.
in Ephesians 4, when they're talking about the gifts that God gave to the church, prophets, apostles, teachers, and blah, 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 he says we're going to need those until we come into the fullness of maturity in Christ. Right now we see in a glass darkly. One day we're going to see fully. Well, we're not seeing fully yet, but there is a great communion that we can have with the Father through Jesus right now. Right now. We don't have to wait. Now, will it culminate and even become better? Yep, and that's what he's saying here.
Yeah.
Your body's going to be changed. You're going to know everything fully. Go back to Ephesians around 4-ish. And he said, all of that is coming. But at the same time, right now, you have access.
Right
to
now, you
boldly
can
go
be
in.
in the face of the Father and still be flawed.
Exactly.
Because Jesus is standing between you.
Right.
And you know what? It's going to be a lot tougher here than it will at that end time.
Right.
But there's a reason that we do that. The learning to subject ourselves, force ourselves to do what the Father is calling us or being or leading us to. He's leading us to get you to a point, right? And I feel like you can say no all you want, and he's pretty hard-headed. He's going to drag you through the mud because your heart is perfect, but there's little things you don't want to let go. Anyway, it's tough, and it's frustrating, and it's all these things. You're going to go through all this stuff, but you can still be in the face of the Father just like Adam and Eve were right here, right now, and learn that fight is okay. He's not condemning you because you won't change things. There's a mindset in there that can be different, but that's what you're doing. You're changing your mindset too.
Yeah. Renewing of your mind.
Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He didn't renew your disposition. He changed your disposition, and now you get to try to subject all your other little thoughts and patterns and habits and things so that you can see the will of God.
Well, and I think one of the reasons that he gave us the example of Moses, scriptures declare that Moses was different than all the other prophets and all the other whatever. So Moses was a different category. Mo got to talk to him like a friend, face to face. And the scriptures declare, I don't speak to him in riddles, God said. I speak to him plainly. And you see that up on the mountain. I'm going to go destroy all those people. No, you can't do that. And there's this exchange that just blows my mind. And we think, we freak out about that a little bit. But it's a picture of what it looks like to have a relationship with somebody at that level. And we see that with Jesus coming in with the disciples. There's an example of that. And he's showing us that that's the kind of relationship you can have with the Father because of the death, the burial, the resurrection, and the ascension of Jesus. You get to bring it all in. And so what does this how do I bring this around into a random Thursday or something, in my life? That's what I'm always, okay, this is great theological discussion. I can be one with Christ. I can be one with God. What does that mean? It means that when stuff's not going right, when he is dragging you over the rocks, when it's all feels like it's falling apart or you have indecision, you don't have to get your creed right to make it okay. You don't have to get all the check boxes off and then it'll be okay. You don't have to make sure you're following Paul or Apollos and then it'll be okay. You don't have to make sure that you're doing everything just right. He says, remember the core and put your face in the Father's. And we say that a lot. I had somebody ask me, I don't know if I told you this or not, what do you guys mean by that? That's a great question. I can tell you what it means for me. That means pulling off in my prayer closet, as it were, whatever that looks like for you. Whether that's laying in bed at night, standing in the shower, in your study, whatever, and getting in his word and in prayer. And I don't mean just like,
And it's not the academic use of
no.
it. So I do it because it makes me start thinking and looking like the kingdom again.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't have face-to-face discussions with God all the time. I'm like everybody else. I run and hide a lot because I either feel inadequate or I just don't want to or whatever that is. And if I go days without, I do my best thing when I get up in the morning, I got nothing else around, and I start my day even as groggy as I am. I might get coffee ready first. Just to read something about the kingdom.
Yeah.
I read a lot of Oswald Chambers. He doesn't, I don't send you, go to Oswald Chambers and see. Oswald Chambers is one of those guys that pushes you back into Scripture and makes you go look at the Father.
Yeah.
To me, that's a successful mentor. But my point is that I don't just read him. When I read him, it makes me read the Scripture for what it says. And so I read that, and all of a sudden I find myself on my face going,
yeah.
If you need me to do it, or you need me to think about somebody else, or show me something where are you at? That's all I want to know.
Yeah.
And you know what? If I get up and that's all I got,
that's a good day.
That's a good day. And over time, if you'll be consistent with that and pursue that, and I'm saying that because I know other people that do spend a lot of time on the face of God. Not as a minister because they have to, because they got to preach or all that kind of stuff. That's their life.
Yeah.
And I watch the fruit that comes out of those people, and I want it.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not just a practical, and I always like to be practical, but I also want to be careful. The end of study is not the practical application. The end of study is knowing God more deeply. And because you read Matthew chapter 7, the tragic line in Matthew 7 was that God didn't know them. That was the tragic line. And the Matthew 7 declares that this path is narrow, and few there be that find it for a reason. Well, wait a minute. We live in America, and there's millions of Christians. That's a pretty broad path. I would tell you that the path to knowing who God is and being known by Him is much more narrow than Sunday morning at 11. And I know that that's kind of controversial, but he says I've said this before, that if you're preaching a gospel that's not difficult to walk in, you're not preaching the gospel of the Bible.
And you don't know what you're thinking. Or actually, I would tell you, you've stopped subjecting yourself to the Spirit.
Yes.
And I know that can get contentious. I don't mean that ugly. I just
and it's a whole different discussion because and we would get into this another day, but that's where the whole, the tempest that surrounds the Lord. It's not chaos. It's the fact that He's ripping apart all of this stuff that we have not brought into subjection yet. And so Jesus sets this example of bringing the entire existence of the universe under subjection. And all He's asking us to do is bring us under subjection. One little guy, one little person.
I will tell you, it's all the way through His walk in His life.
Yeah.
Even at the end, before He actually goes, He's in that Garden of Gethsemane, man, and He is sweating the load in a big way. The beating was a big deal. But that's the place where he wanted it to go anywhere else but that. That's the human part. I get that.
Well, and if you'll notice, and I've said this before too, he never cried out during the beating.
Yeah.
He cried out when his father was absent from him. And it was,
he probably knew that was coming too.
that's what I'm saying.
That's the part he didn't want to happen.
That's the part I
That's
think,
life.
that's the part that caused him consternation, I believe.
I agree with you.
Because he found physically, this somebody's going to send me an email and stop watching for this. But if you study historically, there are people who have died in a physically more heinous way than Jesus did.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
It was awful. I don't want to take away from it. But it was not the apex of the frustration. It was not the apex of the pain. When he cried out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? Every molecule of his humanity in that moment felt something that he had never before and never since felt.
Well, he knew it was coming.
Yeah.
But even he couldn't know what it was going to be like until it happened.
And you say, but he was God, he knew everything. But according to the book of Hebrews, even Jesus learned obedience by that which he suffered. And when you start wrestling with those sorts of things and you start trying to figure out those sorts of things, that's when you've got to take your face to the Lord. And you get on your face, and maybe you're prostrate in the floor of your room. Maybe that's what it means for you. I actually had somebody tell me a story the other day, and it was about you. And we were in a prayer meeting. And y'all have been to church prayer meetings before. Well, we don't usually have prayer meetings like that. They're a little different. And this person said they came in, they've only been once or twice, and they said the thing that impacted them the most was that Tim walks in to pray, and we're like, all right, let's get started. And you laid down on the floor with your Bible and your notebook and just started talking to the Lord and weeping and crying out to God to show me who you are. And they never forgot that. Because it wasn't, please heal me or do this in my family. It was, Lord, show me who you are. Because if I know who he is, what's going on in my family is just nearly irrelevant. And when we talk about putting your face into his face and looking at him, that's what we mean.
Yeah.
Is just show me who you are. Moses saying, show me your glory.
You can work yourself to a point where you can do that regardless of the circumstances that are swirling around. The world can literally stop.
Yeah.
You can do that.
It's when I was telling, and I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it probably until I die, but when Eli passed, and I turned around that day at the funeral, and I watched my wife for over an hour hugging people in the receiving line, which is not her thing. She's not a hugger, especially for people that aren't immediate family. And when I say immediate family, I mean me and the kids. Just the way she's wired, it's all good. But there was a supernatural event that was taking place there because she's spent time ahead of that moment asking God, who are you? Finding out who he is. And in that moment, she was able to stand in a confidence of who he was. That his sovereignty and his goodness and his reign was not threatened by the darkness of the day. And we face that a lot in our family with Brenna and with other things. We have faced that a lot. There's some of you that have faced it in much deeper, darker ways. That's how people who have been victims of abuse and things, horrible, awful things, can find hope. Their hope's in the resurrection. That's what Paul was trying to say in this text. He's like, if we lose the resurrection, we lose the linchpin of everything that Jesus was putting under subjection. Because it's the last thing. It's the keystone. And if we lose that, then everything's going to fall apart. And he's saying, nope, it's not going to fall apart. Not only is it not going to fall apart, it's together now.
Yeah.
And so, you got anything? I mean, we're kind of at a break there, but thank y'all for joining. Again, share the podcast, make a comment, follow us on TikTok, follow us on YouTube, Facebook. We're out there on all the stuff. We're trying to put out little short videos, highlight type stuff. Follow those, share those. We're getting some good traction out of those. Coming up, happenings coming up. October the 31st, I'll be doing a devotional Bible study meeting for the Blue Letter Bible Company. They're having a staff meeting, nationwide staff meeting. I'll get to do a devotional for them. Pretty excited about that. I'm going to be speaking at Mending Fences, Recovery. I think it's Recovery Ministry at Cross Brand Cowboy Church coming up in November. Don't have anything else on the docket. We need to do a Bible study training somewhere. Hey, if you want to have the Crucibles Fire come out and do a how to study the Bible training at your church or your small group or your Sunday school, let us know, man. We come out, doesn't cost you anything. Might cost you $5 for a book, but to help us pay for some printing costs. But even don't let that stop you. If you would like to do that, give us a contact. Don't forget about our app out on the app stores, Apple and Google Play. Download our app if you would, please. Help us get some traction there. Follow us on all the stuff. You got anything else? Remember Chuck Woolery, we'll see you in 2 and 2. Nah, we'll just see you next week. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.